Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. Welcome to our panel and our discussion on the intersection of technology and domestic violence, hosted by the COVID-19 Task Force on Domestic Violence. This is our 9th in our seminar series focusing on educating and discussing domestic violence during this time. We're so thankful for all of you who have joined us and tuned in, and it would be great to get a sense of who is in our audience right now. So if you could introduce yourself in the chat box with your name, pronouns, and where you're watching the seminar from, that would be great. Excellent. I can start off here by introducing myself. So my name is Chiara Albanese, and I take the pronouns she, her, hers. I graduated from Harvard College last year with a degree in psychology and studies of women, gender, and sexuality. And I'm calling in from our nation's capital, Washington, D.C. Tracy, if you want to introduce yourself, I'll pop it to you.
Yeah, hi, my name is Tracy Sockett, and I take the pronouns she, her, hers. I graduated from the Boston Conservatory in 2019 with a BFA in musical theater, emphasis in dance and dance history. And I am calling in from a road trip in Colorado, so that is why I'm inside of a car right now.
Great, yeah, so if Tracy's internet comes in and out, that's what's happening there, so bear with us. Excellent. And we're honored, of course, to be moderating this discussion with our incredible panelists, who we are so grateful are joining us from all over the globe, providing their expertise and insight and reflections. So we can kick off introductions. First, I'm going to start with Adam Dodge. He is the founder of EndTab, which is an organization standing for Ending Technology-Enabled Abuse. Adam's work is characterized by his dedication to addressing the existing and future threats posed by technology to victims of crime and gender-based violence. He has written extensively on technology-enabled abuse, non-consensual pornography, co-authored a domestic violence advisory on the emerging threat of deepfakes, and created the first resource guide for victims of non-consensual deepfake pornography. Adam spends a great deal of his time delivering innovative technology-enabled abuse training to victim-serving organizations and government agencies around the world.
Next, we have Kathryn Kosmides. Kathryn is a longtime entrepreneur and activist who has worked with technology companies throughout her career. In January 2018, she founded Garbo, a nonprofit technology startup on a mission to proactively prevent gender-based crimes in the digital age through a new kind of online background check.
Great. Our next panelist, I'll be sorry about the truck. Our next panelist is Hera Hussain. Hera is the founder and CEO of CHAYN, a global volunteer-run project crowdsourcing resources on the web to address gender-based violence. CHAYN has reached more than 360,000 people through its resources, which are designed with survivors of abuse. Born in Scotland, raised in Pakistan, and living in the UK, Hera knew from early on she wanted to empower women. Hera is a passionate believer in using the power of open source technology and open data to solve the world's pressing issues. Hera is on the Forbes 30 Under 30 and MIT Technology Review's Innovators Under 35 list.
Awesome. Next, we have Natalie Dolci. Natalie takes the pronouns she, her. She began her anti-violence work while earning her degrees at Tulane University and has been working in gender-based violence prevention and response for over 13 years. She has provided direct services to survivors in community-based agencies, campus-based settings, and within the criminal justice system. Natalie has conducted local research on technology-enabled coercive control, trained nationally on the role that the abuse of technology plays in interpersonal violence, and is a steering committee member of the Technology-Enabled Coercive Control Working Group. She is committed to relational work that focuses on principles of equity and collaboration. In her free time, Natalie likes to travel, hike, and try new things.
Excellent. And our final panelist is Kiana Swearingen. Kiana has worked in the anti-violence field for over 15 years. Her work is centered on intersectional and trauma-informed prevention and response to gender-based violence. As the Prevention, Education, and Communications Manager for Safe Campus at the University of Washington, she supports communities in implementing strategies to create healthy workplace cultures that inhibit harm from occurring. She supervises the peer lead EPIC Prevention of Sexual Harassment program for academic students and employees and postdoctoral scholars. She is trained nationally on theory-driven community-centered best practices for developing and conducting prevention efforts on college campuses. Kiana is on the steering committee of the Technology-Enabled Coercive Control Working Group, and she co-chairs the University of Washington's Title IX Training and Education Working Committee. Prior to her time at the University of Washington, she worked for 9 years as a domestic violence advocate and community-based middle school prevention educator. She also has 2 young children, so this work is not just her job, but also her attempt to build a healthier world for them and their peers. Excellent. Okay, now that we got through all of that, you all know exactly how incredible all of our panelists are going to be today. Tracy, when you're ready, feel free to start us off with our first question.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're starting pretty broad. We just want to start with an easy question and have you all share a little bit about your work. And maybe we'll call on people in order. So Hera, do you want to go first?
Sure. So I started CHEN 7 years ago, and I started because I had helped 2 friends very close to me get out of abusive marriages, one in Pakistan. I was at university at that time, and one in the UK. And I just found that as a young person, I guess I'm still young, my 31st birthday is 3 months away. So I choose to use the European definition of young, which is under 35. Yeah, at that time I was like, whoa, when I was Googling with my friend, trying to find stuff online, we just couldn't find anything. And all of the information that we came around digital safety was written for people in the public eye, like journalists and authors and celebrities, or even things like, what is the law? How do you collect evidence that you were in an abusive marriage? That stuff just didn't exist. And for a lot of things, you had to call people like charities up. And when we tried doing that, we found a lot of the content, a lot of the attitudes were just not intersectional enough. And this was in the UK. And I just had huge problems with and found it very problematic how the whole sector was set up. So that inspired me to start CHEN. And now you've already heard the bio, so you know exactly what I'm doing. But yeah, I actually went full-time on CHEN last month. So I've been running it as a volunteer myself for 7 years, and I only went full-time last month. And we do digital services to support survivors and people close to them. We create guides in multiple languages, one of the only organizations in the world that think about issues like that in multiple languages, like all the way from like Turkish to Albanian and Arabic and my mother tongue Urdu. And is mostly run by volunteers who are survivors of abuse. So yeah, and I'm really excited to be here to hear from everyone else, because it seems like it's a whole wealth of knowledge in this chat.
Awesome. Natalie, do you want to go next?
Hi, thank you. As the bio introduced, my area of practice has been working with survivors of gender-based violence. And I can think back to my first year of advocacy, where I was working with survivors who were experiencing cyberstalking and the distribution of intimate images. And it really felt like the response was, well, those kinds of harm belong somewhere else, that advocates had not been equipped to respond to those types of harm, that the criminal legal remedies survivors were seeking were not responsive to those types of harm. And, in the intervening decade plus, it really felt like not enough had changed. So 4 years ago, Kiana and 2 of our collaborators, Dana Lockhart and Dana Cuomo, and we started developing the Technology-Enabled Coercive Control Working Group, which was really intended to be a multidisciplinary work group that would look to increase capacity and find additional solutions for people who are experiencing technology-enabled coercive control. That body of work has fallen into 3 main buckets. That's been training, so training allied professionals, advocates, police prosecutors, even UW IT directors, research. So we did qualitative research with survivors and service providers about perceived deficits in our community response, and then the increasing of community capacity through developing a tech-enabled course of control clinic, which is a volunteer clinic located in a domestic violence program that essentially is a trauma-informed Genius bar where survivors can bring their devices and help get them sanitized and document what the point of compromise was and secure it for the future. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing, Natalie. Kiana, do you want to go next?
Yeah, and I just dropped the link to the research that Natalie just referenced in the chat for folks, which gets you back to our website eventually as well. But it's an open source research document for y'all as you're trying to kind of build the argument for why we need to be thinking about technology-enabled coercive control and abuse. So yeah, so my lens, I would say, is based in that I used to work in a confidential location with families that were rebuilding their lives after fleeing abuse. And in that space, I worked with entire family systems. And what became apparent very quickly was that families would come to be safe, and then very quickly their teenage kiddos and youth would start to engage in relationships where the abuse cycle was continuing, even while they were in our program. And predominantly technology was being used to abuse them because they were in a confidential location, so their partners couldn't even come there. So it was through chatting online, it was through their cell phones that these folks would maintain abuse over them. Many of these situations led to sex trafficking as well for many of the vulnerable youth that I worked with. And that really led me to thinking about the issue of kind of technology and abuse from a prevention lens. Like, what information do youth need early on as they engage in relationships to do that in a healthy way and to be able to set consensual electronic boundaries with their partners? And so that's really the foundation of my lens. What tools and strategies can we as communities build as individuals, as those who support those who are experiencing violence, to ensure that we are prepared to both prevent harm but also respond when it occurs. And so a lot of my work is around training and supporting folks who have never thought about this issue before, specifically like Natalie referenced, IT professionals, right? Survivors will come to them and they'll say, that can't happen, that's not even real, what you're describing doesn't exist. Our platform can't be used in that way. And just the disregard of people's reality and the pain of that. So those are some of my kind of foundations of where I am. I now work at a university, but I also serve on the tech committee, kind of thinking about manifestation of this in our entire region and how we can build a response. And I grew up in rural Alaska, so I specifically also think about how this shows up in rural spaces very differently than it does in urban settings as well. So.
Great, thank you. Adam, do you want to go next?
Sure. This is so cool, first of all. This is so cool. I am really geeking out on this panel. I feel really lucky to be a part of it and be among such amazing colleagues interested in this intersection of technology and domestic violence or technology abuse. Just quickly, I'm an attorney in California. I've spent about the last 10 years focused on helping survivors of gender-based violence at a nonprofit. And, you know, as everybody has sort of been alluding to, the intersection of technology and gender-based violence is a sort of a ubiquitous issue in our field, and yet one that really doesn't get a lot of attention for some reason. So while there's a lot of us on this panel talking about this, we are definitely in the extreme minority of people that are focusing on this. And so now I started my organization really focus on training victim serving professionals how to be not experts, but just a little more tech savvy to the ways in which technology is misused to harm folks, so that they can prevent it, that recognize red flags and respond to it. Because we have really good playbooks for when abuse is happening offline for physical abuse or sexual violence, but as soon as the abuse goes digital or online, the victim resources sort of fade away. The ability for law enforcement to be effective in addressing those types of crime really deteriorates, and that's not tenable when technology is really ubiquitous in these cases. So that's what I focus on, just training anybody who works with victims to be a bit more tech savvy. And I'm no expert at technology, so this is really something anybody can do. It's just have to be passionate about helping survivors, which I think a lot of folks are.
Awesome, thanks for sharing. And last but not least, we have Kathryn. Do you want to
Yes, thank you so much. I'm going to mimic Adam. Thank you so much for having me on this panel. I feel very blessed to be a part of this with some amazing folks. I myself am a survivor of domestic violence and gender-based violence, both kind of physically and digitally. And so in 2016, I found myself in a very abusive relationship with someone I met on an online dating app. Left the relationship, was able to leave the relationship a year and a half later, thought it was over. He started this whole campaign of digital harassment against me, including, emailing me, calling me, texting me, no matter how many times I changed my phone number, emailing my bosses a lewd video of me and my colleagues and our investors, and then going so far as to post on these revenge websites like liarsandcheaters.com and exposedpsychos.com. And these started ranking #1 in my Google search results, which is a big problem for survivors. And so I was kind of forced to go into the legal system to get an order of protection and to get criminal charges hopefully filed. And through the process of, it's now been 3 years, I've spent over $150,000 in the legal system. I realized that if it's this hard for a white, educated, privileged young woman with access to a huge amount of capital, what is it like for the average person going through this system? And really, how can we prevent someone from becoming a victim of not only an abuser, but of the legal system itself? And by doing that, I thought that, okay, you do that by preventing someone from meeting a potentially dangerous person. How do you prevent someone from meeting a potentially dangerous person? You enable them to have information before that first meeting. And so Garbo is a new kind of online background check designed to be used before a first meeting that provides access to records around gender-based violence so you can make informed decisions about your safety.
That is awesome. Thank you for sharing, Kathryn. And so to follow up that question, and anyone can feel free to jump in on this one, but we were wondering how your work has changed due to the pandemic.
I can go ahead by saying that my work has increased a lot. So we have had an increase in our traffic by like 3 times. It actually, the one positive, like in a twisted way, impact on my organization was that finally, like Adam was saying, I'm that annoying person who was applying for grant funding saying, this is important, this is important, this is important. And no one's been paying attention, but somehow it was that through this pandemic, people started understanding how important it is, and actually CHAYN got funding. So that's how I've been able to go full time and create a whole new digital service around providing remote trauma support, because a lot of people cannot afford therapists. In many parts of the world, you just can't. Maybe physically impossible, you might not have the money, might be a taboo. And other people who do have access to therapists and do have access to group therapy, which is a much cheaper form and sometimes free, provided by shelters, couldn't go there. So we created a whole new service for that in 10 days as a completely volunteer-run initiative, and now have just launched this week with an aim of helping 300 people over the next 5 months. So all of this stuff has happened in the last 3 months. So, really, but the thing, if I had to say one thing that I'm really glad about, is that people have realized that it's not a niche subject. I have fear that people are now getting too cautious and they're like, let's not use technology at all. Let's just, so there's a whole, that kind of like backlash and like knee-jerk reaction. It's like, how can you provide digital safety on digital devices? They are unsafe. And I'm like, no. This is the wrong way of talking about this. So, but yeah, that's like, in summary, that's a lot has changed in 3 months. And I'm curious to see how it's been for other people.
I can offer a few things that, I'll say, I appreciated those observations. I think that there have been some strengths that have come out of this time. I think one of those strengths is I'm seeing increased empathy for survivor experience, as people are really seeing this collapse of the illusion that the online world and in real life are somehow different. I think survivors experience that abuse very impactfully when it happens online. And our research revealed there were many survivors who experienced physical abuse as well as digital abuse who said the physical abuse was preferable because it would end. And I think that, we're really seeing people watch their worlds be merged with technology in this way. And so I think that's increased some empathy. I think I'm seeing some innovation on the court side as far as protection orders and being able to accept documents remotely, which I think increases access for people who have, even outside of a COVID context, and doing some more hearings remotely. So I'd like to see more of that. And then I think I'm on the third prong of progress, seeing victim services agencies really step up to developing new tools, thinking about communicating with people remotely, and thinking about how to do so safely and protecting the personally identifying information, and thinking about things like encryption. So I think I'd like to see a lot of this innovation stick around after the crisis.
Yeah, I'm just going to share something that has nothing to do with me, actually, but I saw this in a Wired article earlier this week that a woman who works in tech in Israel, whose sister was a victim who lost her life in an intimate partner violent relationship, decided to really wanted to focus on tech-enabled solutions for survivors of domestic violence, and created a hackathon for focus solely on creating tech-empowered solutions for domestic violence survivors. And they had over 1,800 people participate, and the top 10 ideas got funneled into a incubator and accelerator program just for domestic. I mean, this intersection of tech tools to address this issue is really, I mean, Kathryn's doing it, but she's an outlier. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of people leveraging technology and innovation to address this. And I just thought, I don't know that would have happened if we weren't in this environment. So I think we'll look back on this time, sort of what everybody's alluding to, that there have been a lot of advancement, a lot of advances and opportunity and innovation that has come out of this. It's pretty exciting. But obviously on the other side, we're seeing a huge spike in the numbers of the way people are being harmed online, and really normalizing online abuse and online sexual abuse and non-consensual pornography. And the final thing I'll say is it's really exposed how gendered online abuse is towards women, and the societal norms that men sort of have adopted online, and what they think is okay and what is normal and what is healthy is so far from that. So I think we have a lot of work to do on the prevention side as well.
Excellent, great. To take a little bit of a step back, as you're all evidence of, this is an incredibly important issue, especially where technology intersects with intimate partner violence and domestic violence, but it's often not what is top of mind for folks when they think about intimate partner violence. What, just for our perhaps less well-informed participants today, what would you all say are some of the unique challenges of tech-enabled abuse? Like, how does that manifest? How is it different from other forms of intimate partner violence?
I'm happy to jump in. I think it's undercover. It's not a bruise on your face or something that people can see. And so I think that is really hard. It's also, as Adam mentioned, performed a lot of the time not through stalkerware that you might think of installed in your device, but through applications that are like a calendar. So I was stalked through my calendar app. He had given himself permission to my calendar, and so he would show up to where I was and things like that. And so it's also abuse that happens just through traditional online digital platforms. And finally, I'll say that it's also when you do report, and if you have the opportunity to report, you're often not believed, or you're kind of laughed out of a police station. And like, I was literally told, we're too busy dealing with murders in my situation. And I'm like, well, I could be murdered. Don't you want to prevent that from happening? And so it's also a lack of response from the legal system, from the criminal system, that really hinders the what happens with technology-enabled abuse.
And to kind of add to what Kathryn stated too, I think when we work with survivors, it's the pervasive nature of it, how it's intrusive in their life throughout the day. So you can't go to work and get on your computer without fear that your ex or your current partner is also going to send you an email there. I think also the access it gives folks to impact someone's employment. And Kathryn, you spoke to that in your personal experience. Thank you for sharing that. But just the ability to threaten someone in all different realms of their life through technology, and to do that quickly, and to do that in a way that is very covert. You know, we often say that stalking used to be a full-time job. You had to literally get in your car and drive somewhere to know what someone was doing in order to harm them. But now you can do it sitting at your work computer during the day. And so just the ability to interrupt someone's life and to degrade them and to impact them is just so much more in depth. And then I would say the other really challenging thing, and folks have hearkened to this too, is that folks just really invalidate the experience of tech abuse as not as harmful as physical violence or even emotional violence. And so when you seek help, a lot of people are not believed, or they are not offered the equal support that they should be. Like you said, Kathryn, about the legal system, not knowing how to have remedies for this, how to respond. We have challenges in our region with police officers even feeling like they can take a report on tech abuse because they're like, where does this fit? Does this count? How do I count this? So that invalidation of your experience when you already with tech abuse often feel like you are kind of like you're being made to feel crazy, right? About what's happening, the invasiveness, the intrusion in your life. And so then to have external systems tell you that what is happening is also not true or valid, it's just so hard and painful. So.
That's excellent. Thank you so much. Sorry, go ahead, Tracy.
Oh, yeah, I was going to move on to the next question. That was awesome. Thank you guys for sharing. So moving into kind of like the preventative realm, to your knowledge, what tools exist for domestic violence survivors to protect themselves online?
I would say that one thing that has really come across, and I know that I'm echoing what Kathryn and Adam and other folks have said today, is that abusers do a great job of cultivating a perceived expert status when it comes to technology, but they are often not experts. Often they are relying on simpler things such as knowing the survivor's password, social media, calendar apps, things like that. So, you know, one example that comes to mind is a woman who had been referred to the tech clinic because she'd been working with an advocate closely to get into permanent safe housing. She got into her new apartment and didn't realize that her daughter was on the Snapchat map, and the abuser found them that way. That's not a high level of sophistication on his part, but I think empowering survivors with knowing about things as simple as two-factor authentication, location settings, having robust password management, that kind of prevention can really prevent a breach later on, and increasing your feelings of competence with technology really closes that gap and kind of takes the wind out of the sails of the perceived expert status of the abuser.
I'm so glad you mentioned that, because that was exactly what I was going to say. In fact, when we created our do-it-yourself online safety guide, which is now in 9 languages, one of the things that I got, most people were very excited about it because it just went through basic information like, you know, check your passwords, you know, who's tagging you in pictures, you know, is your location showing up in your pictures, all that kind of stuff. And one of the response that I got from some of the some experts was like, well, this is too basic. And I was like, yes, but this is based on my experience of being in like DV, domestic abuse forums, where I would talk to women and like they would be so scared like that someone had hacked into their account, and just a few conversations, like few like sentences in, it was because they hadn't changed their Amazon password. It was like some really basic stuff. And I think that this generalization of, and this somewhat hyped thing about the dangers, not that there aren't dangers. And of course, people who are skilled, technically skilled, are able to, and it's really, really, really hard to circumvent that. But it's great that there are simple resources now, like password managers, like guides. Many organizations now have them, which is amazing. Even government websites have them now, which is really nice. Most of it's outdated information, but that's one of the problems. But it's like, and even like social media platforms are allowing you to see who can see your things. You know, they have that, all of that is success due to the sector. Like Facebook, because privacy settings, you know, a lot of that success comes to activists from the gender space, from the queer spaces, who have been really, really asking these social media companies to take action on that. So this is all really good preventative stuff. The thing that I'm less sure about, I think there's a lot of hype around safety apps, which are like, you know, if you are in danger, call this number or press this button, and then 6 people will know about it. I think there's a very limited use of that. And I think that oftentimes what we understand about abuse is that when someone's life is risk, you know, if they can have time to open an app and call, they might as well call the police. So, or they'll just get in touch with someone to say that that's the problem. Those big events don't manifest themselves like that in most relationships. It's very slow burning, and there are things that go up and down. So actually people are able to just get in touch. It's more that they don't know someone will help them if they get in touch. And that's the public confidence that the work that we need to do as friends and families of survivors, building our institutions so that there is a response that's empathetic. I can tell you in the case of survivor, for example, you know, police usually comes and locks someone up to knock some sense into the abuser. But what happens when they come back out? Like, they're just more angry. So like the thinking about like responses, that's the stuff that's missing. There's so much focus on tech solutions at the moment. And I think I worry that the preventative stuff that's societal is like people are not focusing on that, because that's just so important. Just like Kathryn said, you know, being believed, that's such a big thing.
Yeah, I have been approached by several like people that are interested in making an impact, and they want to fund an app, and I always say no, because I just feel like it's, you know, they can invest that money in a different way into our cause that's going to be much more impactful. And in fact, there's an app called the Aspire app, which is a domestic violence app that masquerades as a news app that allows a survivor to contact services if they're in trouble confidentially. And they left their cloud servers basically unprotected, and they were hacked, and all the survivor information that was logged in there was made available, which is just, you know, it really makes my blood boil, because we work, you know, they're not the people that created this were well intentioned, but if you're going to do this work, you really have to understand the cause and understand the risks of doing something like that. So when I saw that, I just thought, well, it probably wasn't a super effective tool, but for those that did use it, now all their information has been exposed. So that could potentially put them at greater risk.
Really quickly, Adam, thank you both for sharing. Where would you recommend folks calling in or listening, even Tracy and I, to get involved with this or support this work? Where should people be investing their time and money in order to help combat this?
Well, how about donate to Hera's nonprofit doing this work, or Kathryn's, or the Tech Enabled Coercive Control Clinic, or the National Domestic Violence Hotline. You know, they saw a 101% increase in digital abuse calls, but it jumped between 2018 and 2019. So they are fielding a lot of the sort of front end of digital abuse calls. And then I just think also trying to get the word out to victim serving and survivor serving agencies to prioritize tech-enabled abuse, tech-enabled coercive control, and these types of things. Because the one thing you'll learn from, at least in my experience, all over the place, is that the people in our field are not really feel as though they're not tech savvy. And in fact, the National Network to End Domestic Violence did a study, and 87% of domestic violence advocates did not feel totally confident in addressing technology when it's used to abuse their clients, which is that's not tenable. So I think there's a variety, but I would start with the folks on this panel and supporting their work for sure.
Great, that's awesome. And I see some messages popping up in the chat, so that's great. I hope you all get some volunteers coming your way after this call. Great, and again, to follow up, we've been talking a lot about existing technology and technology we all know exists, like Snap chat maps and all that. Adam, I know you do some work specifically on emerging technologies, and I'm sure our other panelists have some thoughts. What do you think about those more emerging tech, like deepfakes, for example, that are being weaponized against victims?
Yeah, you know, it's underneath all the new emerging technology. It's the same abusive behaviors that we've been dealing with for a long time. But I really encourage folks doing this work, not doing this work, to look at any software update or a new app or emerging technology through the lens of how can this be misused to harm folks. And deepfakes is a form of art, is an artificial intelligence powered platform or technology that basically very realistically can swap someone's face from a photo onto somebody's face in a video and to make it appear that they are participating in that video. And of course, because online violence and online sexual violence is so gendered, 98% of all deepfakes are pornographic, and 100% of those target women. So that is this, you know, deepfakes, for all the press and attention they get for electoral interference and things like that. This is a violence against women issue. That's who's being affected, and sadly, it's already iterating to photo apps that digitally disrobe women, and the apps don't even work on men; they only work on women. So they are. I'm a big believer in saying technology is not evil, and it's only when it's misused to do harm. But that app in particular is an evil app. It is a violence against women app. It's problematic. So we're really going to have to deal with the ways in which women are being sexualized and fetishized online through this new technology.
If I can add to that one too, I think thinking about the way technology is being misused, we're also working really hard to try to reach IT professionals before they build it, because we know that many of them don't understand gender-based violence at all. I mean, there's such a gap in how we talk about this issue. And so thinking about the spheres of influence that you have, the relationships that you have, I know we have folks from many institutions across the nation on the call today. Who can you reach out to and say, hey, are you talking about gender-based violence when you talk about emerging technologies? Like 5 years ago, we started talking about accessibility, right? Folks didn't used to think about accessibility at all when they were building technology, and now they have to. It is required. Your product will not survive, it will not thrive without thinking about accessibility. Similarly, we need to think about gender-based violence in the same way. And so we need to reach the folks who are building these tools, help them to understand the problems, and then within those systems, build ways that people can reach out and alert them when things are happening or their platforms being misused, and they can correct those. Because we also know, as many of you know who see in the news, is that when folks have reached out to platforms and said, hey, your platform's being used in this way to harm me, most big companies have said, too bad, we don't deal with that. Free speech, whatever, right? And very few platforms were very responsive to that, and they're only starting to become responsive. So how do we kind of get in the ground floor of having those really powerful relationships with folks so they're thinking about that early and often instead of waiting until thousands and millions of people have been harmed? So.
Absolutely. Thank you guys for sharing. So moving into kind of like looking towards the future, what are the long-term effects that we're going to see on technology-enabled abuse in the domestic violence space even after quarantine is over?
Well, Kathryn, no, go for it.
Okay, happy to. I think as a survivor of this, there are long-term impacts. If you go to the page 5 of my Google results, if you search my name today and go to like page 5, 6, or 7, there are still those posts up because they cost between $500 and $3,000 to get them removed to these sketchy websites. So it is pervasive, and it's a long-term impact to get this information removed from online. And to scrub your devices is very costly. I remember I went and called a guy, and he was like, yeah, it's going to cost $3,000 for me to just even view your phone and things like that. So it's long-term impact that is stuck with you, because as we said earlier, digital and real life are coming together. There is no escaping it. You can't just like log off the internet, as some people will tell you to do. Why can't you just delete your account or do this or do that? You can't. Your lives are intrinsically tied to the internet. My whole career is on the internet. I spend 12 hours a day on a computer. I can't just log off. And so I think it's really about thinking about how we can prevent these from occurring in the first place so that there is no long-term impacts, because it does impact for years and years and years and years and years.
And on the flip side, given that Kathryn's covered the aspect of for survivors, I think the long-term impact on us as a society, what I hope is that because now everyone understands to some extent the nature of this, that we see more diverse teams within technology companies. We see more tech, informed legislations. I know that there is a technology fellows program that works with certain legislators in the Senate. So that's a really amazing initiative in your country, and I would love to see that happen in other countries, because that makes a huge difference, because that means that politicians understand policy. And I also hope that both funders and media, there's been a huge change in the way this reported in the media, and it's so important that we report responsibly on these issues, because as I said, there's a lot of hyping and there's not a lot of nuance, and all of these conversations require nuance. We often hear about again, my hope is that it also allows us to question the way we objectify people on screen, how we objectify women especially, or women of color and queer people, because a lot of the stuff that comes from both deepfakes and image-based abuse is because we view certain things to be shameful, and that shame is projected onto women, right, or women of a certain type, and that shame that is then forced onto them collectively. The collective bullying that we do makes this stuff more harmful. So I think if we can begin to question these societal beliefs which allow us to shame someone into suicide, to leaving the internet. Some people I know have had to leave the internet, or if they're a shell of themselves because they're so scared. And why should you be so scared? We still block all comments on all of our YouTube videos. I mean, it sounds like I would love to have a conversation with people who watch our YouTube videos, but you can't. So I think, because you asked the question before about what everyone else can do, all the things that I've said, there's a role for all of you in there. So as members of the public who are connected to people, and have studied in institutions where power is made, this is what you should be doing.
Yeah, I love that comment, and I think it really is so true that we all have a responsibility in deflating the amount of power that an abuser has. I have absolutely worked with survivors where when intimate images were sent to the workplace, they were fired, and that has been the workplace allowing themselves to be a weapon of the abuser. And these are cultural choices that we should make to rally around and support the survivor, as opposed to permitting ourselves to become tools of the abuser. Another thing that comes up for me is thinking a little bit about how slow our criminal legal system is. I've encountered situations recently where there's a protection order between two people, and then they're both in the same Zoom classroom or both in the same Zoom conference breakout, and it's really hard to interpret. Is this a violation? Is this not? But I think there's a lot of things we can do before the criminal legal system, that culturally as workplaces, as classrooms, as clubs that we're involved in, where we can have our own standards and expectations and ways to support survivors. So I think when people ask, what can you do? I really encourage people to look at the communities they're part of and think about how they can create communities that are supportive and responsive to these issues.
I just want to raise too that I know folks have kind of mentioned it, but we know that folks who experience marginalization are disproportionately impacted by technology abuse as well. And so for some of the folks that I work with, the communities that they had developed that were supportive, that were safe for them as folks of color, specifically as Black folks on college campuses, have disappeared and are gone. And so they're trying to figure out, how do you recreate that sort of safety and trust in an online space when the harassment is still occurring, when the targeting, the violence is still occurring. And so I think one impact is how the communities, the beautiful communities people had created, have been harmed by this time, and how our systems are not giving people the space or time to recreate the most valuable thing they need, which is community, which we know is a resiliency and protective factor. Having community makes it less likely someone will experience violence because folks around them will notice it. They will speak into that person's life. They will support them. They will believe them. And when you're in isolation, you're more likely to be harmed, but you're also more likely to be less likely to be supported as well. So I think one thing is we have to think about how do we rebuild healthy communities after we come out of this.
Excellent. Thank you all so much again. So touching back on, I believe, Hera, you briefly were talking about new legislation and regulation that is occurring or in the process of occurring in order to work on these tech-enabled abuse issues. I have a friend who works in the sex tech space, and she had a question for you all that I'd love to elevate if you're comfortable. That is this, I will read it straight from her mouth to mine. She was noting that technology companies and laws that regulate them have been conflating sex trafficking with consensual legal sex work for years, something I'm sure you're all aware of. And she was wondering if you could speak to how your companies or organizations and how emerging technologies in your space today are making sure they're targeting their efforts in using technology to prevent and stop crimes like sex trafficking, et cetera, without sacrificing the safety and digital rights of consensual legal sex workers, such as sex educators, LGBTQ plus community, and women who have been treated as collateral damage, especially in wake of laws like FOSTA, SESTA, and now the Earn It bill. I would love to hear if you have any thoughts on this, and thank you, Val, for asking that question.
Well, I can answer. That's a great question, and I'm so glad that question was asked. So CHAYN doesn't do a lot of policy work because we didn't have capacity to do so. But I can tell you one thing that I've realized that is very disruptive and powerful is that because we're such an intersectional organization, the fact that I've started engaging those spaces is already creating problems, because in many of the countries where we are, exactly the attitudes that your friend has described exist. So it is so important to be a gender-based violence organization, but be trans inclusive, but be, supporting the rights of sex workers, recognizing them as, in the economy and as human beings with rights. And it is so important. And the fact that we speak about privacy, but we don't use that as a shield, against legitimate, freedom of speech, transparency, accountability. So again, as I said before, nuance is really lacking, unfortunately, in the gender-based violence sector as well. And there's a very old-fashioned views that are very pervasive. And I found myself on the defense line many times last year, having been targeted on our trans inclusive strategies, and we get a question about it all the time. So my hope is that I can act as a good ally, and that my organization can represent those issues and be safe spaces for those communities. And we're very keen on working. I used to be very scared of talking up about this because of backlash and, not feeling safe enough or I had the support enough to talk about this or support those things. But I absolutely, maybe it's age. I feel very comfortable doing that now, and look forward to championing all of these issues in any forum that I'm in.
Just on the legislation, I spend a lot of time working on or responding to proposed policy and legislation, which usually misses the mark when they're trying to, because it's people that don't work in our field or don't work in our area, and a constituent has an issue, and so they go full bore. But an interesting one that has come up and passed in Texas is the how to deal with the unwanted intimate images that are sent primarily to women by men, and how to deal with this. And so it's been criminalized in Texas, which is pretty interesting. And Bumble supported it because a lot of that's happening there. But it's a Class C misdemeanor, so it's basically a fine. And I actually talked to a bunch of law enforcement in Texas this week and asked them about it. And they said they have tried to they've received complaints and they've tried to take those investigations forward. But when the survivors find out what's required of them to go through this legal process, this criminal legal process, and what their best case scenario is, which is essentially a $500 fine, they're not following through with it. So there's this idea about what legislation looks like in a vacuum, and then what that law is going to do practically in the real world. And unfortunately, a lot of laws, when you look at, okay, how is this really going to impact survivors in a meaningful way? I think that's a really important question to ask, because the law might sound really great, but when you think about it practically, it may have really sort of nominal or minimal impact.
Excellent. I don't want to interrupt anyone else if they want to answer.
Okay.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Tracy.
Cool. Okay, so as far as taking action, which I would sure hope that our audience members feel inspired to do so after the seminar, do you feel that there are ways to use technology to combat?
I think Tracy's breaking up a little bit. So I'm happy to pose this question. Talking about moving forward as a group in this space, what do you feel like there's room to grow within this space in terms of like technologies we could be using in a better way, or like basically, yes, where do you feel like we still have room to grow in addressing these issues? And secondarily, what are some ways that communities and individuals, like the folks who called in, can work during the pandemic to prevent the continued proliferation of technology-enabled abuse?
I want to mention one project that Natalie and I were part of, and that we supported the launch of the first ever technology clinic here in the nation. There's now a second one on the East Coast as well. So specifically training volunteers to support survivors or any individual to come in and talk about their vulnerabilities and then put remedies into place. And so how can more community-based solutions be developed where community gets together and assesses the problems and says, what is our gap right now? What do we need? I think that's the key thing, is how do you bring multiple players to the table, specifically kind of centering folks of color, queer folks, trans folks in that conversation, saying, what do you need? We know that the tech clinic that we developed here in Seattle and is running really strong has been incredibly valuable to many of our survivors here. So I wanted to mention that as one way of kind of furthering this work into other communities and other spaces.
I definitely want to do this as a global thing. So I'm going to be hitting you both up for like advice on how to run that. It's been something I would love to do now that I have a little bit of money that I can actually afford to do it for the organization.
We would love that. And I would say, speaking to people who might be more in the gender-based violence space first, it's okay to be critical consumers of people in tech who approach you with interest in something. I really appreciated Adam uplifting that there are a couple of app, ideas that he had to say no thank you to. And I think, we field a lot of like vendor-driven, short-term kind of projects that are not going to be a good fit. On campuses, we often get marketed these consent apps where you record that you're consenting to a particular sex act, which is not the kind of healthy mutuality, sexuality that we think we all envision for our world. And I think there's also sometimes people who want short-term relationships, like we did one day of work and now we can put on our website that we worked on gender-based violence. So I would go ahead and say, for people in this space, you can be critical consumers of people who want to partner with you. And then I'd say for people who are in tech, you may think you have nothing to offer, but it's not true. There's so many people who we were interviewing about volunteering for our clinic who are like, well, I don't do digital forensics. I don't, and truly the skill set that you have is deeply valuable, and just be willing to do some of the work and get some of the training around the content area, around the gender-based violence. And I think it can be a very fruitful partnership.
I would also like to warn, I would really, despite the example that Adam gave of the Israel, that seemed pretty substantial, I would also avoid the whole hackathon route. I've done that for 4 years. I organized more than 20 hackathons. And what I realized was after organizing 20 hackathons for many organizations as CHEN, we spent so many volunteers hours doing that, and all the time training some well-wishing people who had very problematic, patronizing views of, and like treating all survivors like having a singular experience, and a lot of racism and sexism and all of that. I realized, and I organized them around the world, that the only projects that actually were successful of all of them, of the 20 that I organized, and I just was a judge on, looked at, were only 3, one of which CHEN was already a CHEN project and we just furthered it. And the other 2 were existing projects as well, and they just used the hackathon to get a bit of extra money. So just don't waste money on hackathon. It's not a concept that's made for this. If you're using that to kind of make sure people in your organization learn about something, yeah, you can do something like that, but do not throw money at it. That's a waste of money. Just give that money to an organization. Do a long-term project, like do a project, plan for 2 years, plan for a year. Those are the kind of engagements that work. This is not like going to the soup kitchen for your New Year's and like feeling good about it. It's just, this is not, I have problems with that as well, but like these are problems that are serious and need careful consideration. You rocking up with your ties off one day is not going to help.
Just wanted to, Adam or Kathryn, if you have anything to add, we'd love to hear it before we start to wrap up.
Yeah, I mean, I would just echo what Hera said. I mean, and this is just not a technology focused thing. I mean, when you want to help an organization, going to do a one-off thing like paint the fence at a shelter is great, but we really need more long-term consistent support in our world, and it's really rewarding and really fulfilling to volunteer and do this work. It's really impactful. Gender-based violence is still a massive public health issue, like an extraordinarily massive public health issue that is so desperately misunderstood. I still can't believe how misunderstood it is, truly. And I would love to see more men get involved in the cause. I mean, I am unfortunately a real outlier in our field. I'm not a survivor, and I'm a man, and this is not a women's issue. This is a public health issue, and I would love to see, and I think there's a real opportunity because the tech world is so gendered, employee-wise. Like, there's a lot of men that work in that field, so there's a real opportunity for them to get involved and really make a difference and use their skill set to do it. Having people who have this tech expertise, but can be trauma informed and be empathetic to what people. I mean, that is, such a home run and really desperately needed. Which is why the clinic that Kiana and Natalie have created is so amazing, because it actually provides that platform for folks. So yeah, we definitely welcome the support. Just really want it to be long term and really meaningful.
And I'll just quickly mimic everything that was just said. I fully agree with all of it. And I think the most important thing is to do the work, which is something that we all need to really do, and understand the nuances of these issues. We've kind of said the word nuance quite a bit in this conversation, and it is very nuanced, and a lot of the ideals that come into it, even myself, I have to constantly think, how could this platform be used for bad, and in which ways could it hurt survivors and things like that. And so constantly having to do the work, and don't be afraid of messing up in the process of doing that work, but just invest in doing it.
Excellent. We are at about time. Thank you so much for all of your time, everyone who spoke, and thank you for everyone who tuned in as well. This was excellent, and I think everyone's probably as blown away as I am. And just a quick note, in general, is looking beyond this specific episode of the seminar series. Our task force also wants to help you get involved if you would like to. So feel free to follow us on our Instagram, COVID-19 Task Force TV, like our Facebook page, search at Stop COVID-19, Stop DV COVID-19, or go to our website, which we'll post in the chat, to stay engaged in conversation and learn more. So thank you all again, and have a great rest of your day.